What we're going to talk about in ownership in real property is the way that people hold title to the property. Now we will talk about the way an individual holds title, and then we will talk about the way that persons can hold title jointly, together, as more than one person. Do me a favor, as we're studying for this, don't worry about things like corporations and LLCs. Let's keep it to understand how one or more persons can hold title together, and I think you'll be doing yourself a favor if you'll study it from that standpoint. We'll deal with entities a little bit later. Right now, let's just focus on this. The first one is going to be relatively simple. You can own property in severalty. When you look at the word severalty, I would like for you to focus on the part that says sever, to sever yourself from others. Severalty means ownership by one person, one name on the deed. Ownership in severalty, sole ownership, one name on the deed. You feel okay about that? Matter of fact, that's not even going to be hard, is it, on the exam? Severalty, one name on the deed. Now let me ask you this question. If I own property in severalty and then I get married, how do I now hold that property? I still own it in severalty, it's just that now my wife has a marital interest in the property. That's fantastic. Go no farther than that on that topic. You okay on that? Perfect. Now let's move to the concurrent forms of ownership. Listen, I'm going to use the same strategy that I did earlier. I think your notes are fantastic. Sometimes they were a little bit jumbled. So if you don't mind, I'm going to do it on the board, and then you can use it for note purposes however you want to. I will come back and revisit those slides and just simply say, did we touch on all of this? Yes, Julie?
It's better to get the name on the deed when we get married. If you want to
seek legal advice. I will say that there are certainly some reasons why you would want to protect yourself, and this goes a lot towards estate planning and things like that. What would happen if the things you don't want to talk about, go sit down with an attorney and talk about them if you end up in that situation. I get questions like that all the time. I just inherited a piece of property. I don't want my spouse's name on this, blah, 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 or something like that. Talk to an attorney and just let them know. In some cases, it may not be a problem. In some cases, there is a civil issue that you can address. And in some cases, you literally might want to deal with the title. Okay? I mean, your money's going towards this thing, right? Yeah. Concurrent forms of ownership. Let's start. I'm going to start the way that slide right there starts, but then I'm going to change pace just a little bit. The first bullet point that comes up on concurrent forms of ownership, the way that multiple persons can hold title together, the first one that comes up is tenancy in common. Tenancy in common. And here's what I want you to write down next to tenancy in common. Tenancy in common is the default for unmarried persons acquiring property together. It is the default for unmarried persons acquiring property together. What I mean by the default, if two people that are unmarried buy property and they do not state otherwise in the deed, this is the way they're going to hold title. What were the important parts of that statement? How many people was this? More than one. And what was their status? They are not married. This is the way they're getting it, if they don't say otherwise. Tenancy in common. Tenancy in common is extraordinarily flexible. I heard mumbling. What did I not say? I'm sorry.
Oh no, just having to define the default from the very person.
Acquiring property together. So again, Ebony, the key being multiple persons, not married. This is what it is. Okay. Tenancy in common is extraordinarily flexible. People can come into and out of tenancy in common all the time. Okay? In other words, if there are three of us that hold title together, there is Chris, Victor, and Lauren. We hold title together. We buy a property. We do not state how we are going to own that property. How are we going to own that property? Tenancy in common. Tenancy in common. Okay? How much is each of us going to own? 1/3. Each of us is going to own 1/3. Okay? Tenancy in common. Now, let me ask you these questions. Lauren is is tired of dealing with us, so she wants to share her, she wants to sell her interest. Who can Lauren sell her interest to? She can sell it to anybody she wants to. Short of some contract or agreement to the contrary, she can sell it to anybody that she wants to. So now, Lauren is going to sell her share to Virginia. Virginia now joins the group as a 1/3 what? Tenant in common. Okay? If I were to die, who's my property going to go to? It's going to go to my heirs. What if I have 5 of them? Then each one is getting 1/5 of 1/3. And they will now join the group as what? Tenants in common. As I mentioned, this test is really big on what happens when someone sells, what happens when someone dies, what happens if someone gets married, who won't deal with married, on this particular one. Are you okay on that so far? All right. Now, if Lauren does decide to sell, can she sell the whole property? But she can sell her what? 1/3. Remember, going back to day one, if you own real property, I promise you, you have the legal right to sell it. I can't promise you there's a market for it, but you can only sell that which you own, and what she owns is a 1/3 interest in this property. Here's another important point about tenancy in common. If you own a tenancy in common, it's not like I own this third, she owns this third, and Victor owns this third. We each own a 1/3 interest in the whole. Does that make sense? In tenancy in common, you own an interest in the whole, not a specific. And we all have equal rights of use. We cannot bar each other from using the property. Tenancy in common, very, very flexible, is the default for unmarried persons. You feel okay about all that? I'll give you something to compare it to in just a moment. Let me add one more vocabulary word to you. I want you to understand how the word partition goes with tenancy in common. Okay? So I'm getting ready to introduce the word partition. Okay. Chris, Lauren, Victor, 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. Okay. I legally have the right to sell by 1/3. Didn't we just discuss that? Okay, 1/3 interest. Have you met Lauren and Victor? They're insane. They're insane. Nobody wants to be partners with those two right there, okay? So I can't sell my third. They won't buy it. I can't sell it to anyone else. I need to get out of this relationship. What am I going to do? And the answer is, we each have the legal remedy of partition. What that means is, partition means going to the court to have the courts equitably distribute the property. And we need to break up this tenancy in common. If we can't figure it out, we can go to court to have the courts. We can seek an act of partition. We can go to court and have the courts equitably distribute the property. I want you to play Judge Judy for just a moment. So here's the deal. All right, Judge Judy, here's what the three of us own together. It just so happens that we own 3 apartment buildings, each with 4 units in it. Each one brings in the exact amount of money. Each one sits on an acre of land. Judge Judy, can you figure out how to equitably distribute this? Why don't we just create 3 new deeds? A, B, C, and now you guys can go your own way. Is that a remedy? What's the likelihood that it's ever going to be that equitable when it comes time to distribute? So if in fact it can't be equitably distributed this way, what's the court going to order? What's the court going to order? The court's going to order a sale. So even though they didn't want to sell, the courts will order a sale. And then the proceeds could be equitably distributed, okay? That's the idea of partition. Do you understand why the right of partition actually even exists? Otherwise, how would you ever get out of tenancy in common if things aren't working out? That's why that remedy exists. Okay? Tenancy in common. This is the default for unmarried persons acquiring property together. Okay? Questions or comments on tenancy in common? If not, it's okay. Let me give you something to compare it to, and then let's see if you have any questions. Yeah, I'm sorry, Dan.
So
Stand up, right?
Yes, in those in that 3 scenario right there. So the other two couldn't buy
They could.
1/3 from them.
Yeah, to be quite honest with you, before I would go to partition, I would certainly try to work this out. You know, guys, you're much better off just buying my shares out than putting this on the market. Ultimately, if necessary, we would have to take it to an auction, okay? It's not the most, partition is not the most efficient way to remedy this situation. They'd be much better off to buy out my shares. But look, if they don't want it, if this is a sinking ship and nobody wants it, the courts will order that we put it out there and just sell it at public auction if necessary. Okay? Good question. All right, let me jump to the bottom of this slide just real quickly. Let me tell you why I'm jumping to the bottom of the slide. Maybe this will help you from a note-taking and understanding standpoint. Tenancy by the entirety. Here's what you're writing down next to tenancy by the entirety. This is the default, so don't stop writing yet. This is the default for married persons acquiring property while married. In fact, I write it down exactly like that. It's the default for married persons acquiring property when? While married. Again, focus on my definition of the word default. This is the way it's going to be unless you say otherwise. A married couple buys a property, they don't state otherwise in the deed, they're going to hold title as tenants by the entirety. So why did I set it up this way? Unmarried people, tenancy in common. Married people, tenancy by the entirety. If you want something different than that, you need to say otherwise in the deed. Okay? Tenancy by the entirety. Microwave again. Okay? Continuing on tenancy by the entirety, this is the next big note that you need to have. Tenancy by the entirety includes the automatic right of survivorship. The automatic right of survivorship. I want you to underline the word survivorship. I want you to circle it. I want you to point an arrow to it. Okay? Survivorship. Now, let's focus on the word survivorship for just a moment. What I want you to think about in regards to survivorship is that when a person dies, it goes to their surviving partner. Okay? In other words, I don't want you to confuse survivorship with heirs. Now, it's possible that they could be the same person, but it's not inherently the case. In survivorship, if we are married, husband and wife are married. If the husband dies, who's the property going to? His wife, because she is a survivor, not because she is an heir, but because she is his survivor, and vice versa, of course. Do not confuse survivorship with inheritance. Okay? Tenancy by the entirety includes the automatic right of survivorship. You should have two words underlined: automatic and survivorship. So, tenancy by the entirety is actually based on the legal fiction that when you're married, you're no longer two people, you are one legal entity. So that's the idea. It's not like I own 50% and she owns 50%. The marital entity owns the whole. So therefore, if one dies, the other gets it all. Survivorship. You okay with that? I also want you to write this down. I don't know that it'll be testable, but it's interesting too, I know. It is often said that there are 5 unities when it comes to tenancy by the entirety. So put the 5 unities of tenancy by the entirety. The 5 unities of tenancy by the entirety, the acronym is MPIT, P-I-T-T. M-P-I-T-T. Some people say marriage is the pits. I'm not that cynical, but if it helps you, I mean, it may relate to what I don't know. MPIT, the M of course stands for marriage. You have to be married at the time you acquire the property. That's one of the unities. P stands for possession. Both the husband and wife have equal rights of possession. I stands for interest, meaning we have equal interest in the property. It's not like 50-50, we both have complete interest in the property. T stands for time, and T stands for title. Time and title. That just simply means you're on the same title at the same time, meaning that you were married when you acquired the property. Okay? Marriage, possession, interest, time, and title, all of these must exist for tenancy by the entirety to exist. Feel okay about that? It's just a memorization type thing, okay? Tenancy by the entirety, automatic right of survivorship. You say, okay, Chris, I got it, but where are you going for this for test purposes? Let me give you an idea of what this would look like for test purposes. Listen closely. You'll have one of these on my midterm as well, so you get a chance to look at it. My fiance and myself buy a house in Raleigh. This will be our marital home, but we close on it before we get married so we can go ahead and have it fixed up nicely so we can just move right into it when we get married. My fiance and I acquire a house in Raleigh. We close on it today. How do we hold title to that property? Based on what I told you, tenancy in common, correct? Okay. On Saturday, we get married. We get married next Saturday. On our honeymoon, we go down to Atlantic Beach. And while we're in Atlantic Beach, we like the condo that we're staying in Atlantic Beach. So my wife looks at me and said, cool, wouldn't it be neat if we bought the condo that we stayed in for our honeymoon? Let's just buy it. It's for sale. So we buy the condo that we stayed in on our honeymoon, which means we are now what? Married. We are now married. How will we hold title to the property in Atlantic Beach? Tenancy by the entirety. We come back from our honeymoon, we come back to Raleigh. How do we now hold title to the property in Raleigh? It's still tenancy in common. Very few things happen automatically in real estate. Very few things do. We still hold title to the property in Raleigh as tenancy in common. Julie, you asked me this question just a moment ago. My wife looks at me and she says, you know what? My family never liked you. You don't like my family. So the fact of the matter is there might be a dispute if something were to happen to either of us. I would like to hold this property as tenancy by the entirety as well. The property in Raleigh. Is there a way that we can hold title to that property as tenancy by the entirety? Here's what we have to do, Julie. We deed it from ourselves as tenants in common to ourselves as a now what? As now married couple. As a now married couple. We deed it from ourselves as tenants in common to ourselves as a now married couple. Now we have the unities, marriage, possession, interest, time, and title. And so now we can own that property as tenancy by the entirety. But notice it took a proactive step, right? Didn't automatically happen. Can you recognize that one on the exam? Can you get that one right on the exam? Yes, now you're up to 2 points, so you only need 2 more points. Okay? Excellent. We're getting a bunch of them today. Tenancy by the entirety, automatic right of survivorship, 5 unities.
So for the tenancy in common, is that gonna, like, how much you own the property, is that gonna affect how much you pay?
Tenancy in common?
Yes.
Okay. Let me tell me your name again.
Shiana.
John, okay, I just asked you earlier. Gotcha. How about this? Now remember, her question is in regards to tenancy in common, okay? So her question is dealing with this time and title thing and interest and all that type of stuff. What if one tenant in common puts up more money than the others? You know, if I put up more money than the others, I want more what? Interest. Can you have disparate interest in tenancy in common? Yes, but it needs to be spelled out where? More importantly, in the deed. More importantly, in the deed. When you read the deed, it would have, if it just said A, B, and C as grantees, then it would be equal interest. But if you want to own disparate interest, you can say A 50%, B 30%, and C 20%. Okay? If it's spelled out in the deed, that will in fact be reflected. That's what you want. Okay, great question. Great question. Are you okay that tenancy in common is the default for unmarried persons, tenancy by the entirety is the default for married persons? You okay with that? So now you're looking at there and saying, Chris, you left one out. All right? Joint tenancy. I gotta be honest with you. This is going to be tough to understand, but you have to trust me on this. Here's what you're writing down about joint tenancy. Joint tenancy allows for survivorship outside of the marital entity. Joint tenancy allows for survivorship outside of the marital entity. There are a couple of inherent points in that. Joint tenancy allows, is it automatic? No, it allows for survivorship outside of the marital entity. Now, one of the things that's inherent about that is tenancy in common does not even allow for survivorship. So if you're not married and you want survivorship, what are you going to need to ask for? Joint tenancy, okay? So now, it allows for survivorship outside of the marital entity. In North Carolina, if you want joint tenancy, you have to ask for it to be written in the deed. If you want joint tenancy in North Carolina, it has to be written correctly in the deed. If you're ever looking at a deed that includes survivorship, you often see something like this. JTWROS. What do you think that stands for? Joint tenancy with right of survivorship. That's, if you ever see that on a deed, that's what it means. It really is not going to affect you as a real estate agent that much, but that's what it means. Okay, now let me tell you why this is important. Let me tell you why this is important. Can you have survivorship and tenancy in common? No. Does everybody want to get married? No. Okay? So, this allows for survivorship without requiring you to be married. Can you think of situations where this might apply? Where might someone want joint tenancy but they're never going to get married? Siblings. Yeah. Oftentimes it's used for someone who's planning out the way their property is ultimately going to be left. You know, maybe there are 3 kids, and so what the father, as he's planning his estate, may say something to the effect of 3 kids with the right of survivorship. If one dies, it goes to the other 2. If the second one dies, the last one standing gets it all. If that one dies, it doesn't matter. The family line is out at that point. It can go to whoever we want to. So yeah, siblings sometimes. Look, there's some heterosexual couples who will never get married, but they want to have a right of survivorship. There's some homosexual couples who until recently didn't even have the right to get married. So it allowed for them to have the right of survivorship as well. So basically what North Carolina says is, listen guys, we want your property to go to your heirs unless you have done something that says you want it to go to someone else. By entering into joint tenancy, what you're saying is, I have another plan for the disposition of my property. I don't want to go to my heirs, I want to go to my survivors. Okay? Joint tenancy allows for survivorship outside of the marital entity. Okay? Please write this down. There are 4 unities when we talk about joint tenancy. I'm going to say something confusing here, but I will try to redeem myself. There are 4 unities with, in regards to joint tenancy. P-I-T-T, possession, interest, time, and title. Do those sound familiar? Yeah. It sounds just like tenancy by the entirety, but without the marriage, right? Possession, interest, time, and title. Here's what I believe for test purposes. You were tested on joint tenancy on the national side of the exam, not so much on the state version. North Carolina recently, a few years back, does now allow for disparate interest in joint tenancy. You could literally have 50, 30, and 20 now in North Carolina. But I think the way you're going to be tested on the national side, you will be okay to understand the 4 unities that historically have gone along with joint tenancy. And also, when talking about joint tenancy, it's okay. If we ask you a question on the state exam and we tell you that it's joint tenancy, if we tell you that it's joint tenancy, it's okay that you can understand that it includes the right of survivorship, okay? There are some tricky questions that come up in the book about this, and when you bring them to me and we talk about it, I'm going to say, don't panic. I have no reason to believe that you're going to be tested on that level of complication on the exam. What do I want you to know, really, about joint tenancy? It allows for what? Outside of what? Do you understand that survivorship and inheritance are 2 different things? That's what you're studying right there, okay? How do we get started on this? The different way that people can hold title together. Unmarried people defaults to tenancy in common. Married people defaults to tenancy by the entirety. You're not married, you want something other than that? Joint tenancy allows for survivorship outside of marital entity. You feel pretty good about that? Yeah, Jim?
But ultimately, if somebody has, like, went to a lawyer and they created a document, would that supersede all of these?
Give me a little more.
Like, if you weren't married and you bought a house together and you wanted something specific about when you sold the house, or could you go then to a lawyer and have something written up and it would supersede all of these different?
So I own property in just my name?
No, like you and your partner or whatever are buying
Okay.
the property.
We own property, and then I go to an attorney and do what?
Create a document. That.
When you say I, you understand it would have to be us.
Right, they decide
Okay.
as well.
Yes, it's certain, like the situation I was describing a little bit earlier, you can always go and deed the property from yourself in one condition to yourself in another condition. And then the things that we don't talk about too much in this class are there are also things out there like prenups and
Right.
free trader agreements that would supersede
Yeah.
this if you chose to do it. But let me give you an example of what might fall within our realm of testing. Here's the situation. My wife and I own property as tenancy by the entirety. I'm telling you that as part of the setup, okay? Interestingly enough, I have a will that actually says all of my real property will go to my sons from my previous marriage at death. So my will says all of my real property will go to my grown sons, okay? However, the property I own with my current wife, I own as tenancy by the entirety. When I die, which one's going to win? Tenancy by the entirety will win. It will actually supersede the will in that particular case. A little bit later, we'll talk about the concept of probate, opening up a will and reading it to determine if there's anything that violates public policy. But assuming it doesn't, yes, there are legal machinations that you could go through to take care of that.
Why do you have a will then?
Pardon me?
Why do you have a will?
Well, because you have own other things than the house, the marital house. I mean, I own cars and money and assets and other things like that as well. And there may be some properties that are not owned by the entirety. There may be some that I own individually as investment properties or something. Okay, now, as I told you, I wanted to introduce all of these, but I want to flip through these next slides just to make sure we didn't miss anything. This chart right here, which you have, is it legible? Did it come out large enough that you can actually read this chart? It's not a bad chart. You will find that it supports what we talked about in class. It's not bad. Use it as part of your study. Tenancy in common. Notice that we said unequal shares. People can come in and out of tenancy in common all the time. And then notice that the problem topic, did I explain to you what problem topics are? These are areas where students have tested below 60%. So that conversation I just had with you, the difference between survivorship and inheritance, apparently they weren't getting it in other schools or not listening because that is missed 40% of the time. That shocks me. Please don't miss that. That's a given on the exam. You understand what it says, okay? I don't want to make assumptions that are not true. Some little drawings here, kind of cool. But again, we talked about a lot of this. Joint tenancy, let's look at the problem topic here. Upon death, survivorship is automatic. Now, I told you when we tested on the state's, on the national side on this, so we believe that that's the case. If we tell you it's joint tenancy on the exam, it's safe for you to assume that it includes the right of survivorship. Oh. Got a great test question for you. Got a great test type question for you. You will have one of these at the end of the chapter, but this will give you a chance to ask me questions about it. So let me go over it with you this way. Remember, I told you in this section, it's a big deal. What happens when you die, sell, marry, whatever. Okay? So in tenancy in common, if I die, and I don't state otherwise, in tenancy in common, if I die, who's my property going to? My heirs. Okay. In tenancy by the entirety, if I die, who's my property going to? My surviving spouse. In my case, it would be my wife. In joint tenancy, let's take a look at this. You're reading a question about joint tenancy and it says A, B, and C own property together as joint tenants, and let's say with the right of survivorship, okay? So this is the setup of the question. Each of them owns 1/3. Right? A decides to sell his shares. A decides to sell his shares. Who can A sell to? Anyone. Short of a contractual agreement to the contrary, he can sell to anyone he wants to. He decides to sell to D. D joins the group, but D is not a joint tenant because he was not on the same title at the same time. He was not on the original title. Remember the 4 unities: possession, interest, time, and title? Okay, D does not share in those 4 unities with B and C. So D joins the group as not a joint tenant, but a what? A tenant in common. What are B and C with each other? They're still joint tenants with each other. So far, so good? Okay. C dies. Who's this property going to? Property is going to D. Why? Because they're joint. They have survivorship between them. Is any of C's property going to D? No, because D was a tenant in common, not a joint tenant. He doesn't share in survivorship. So now, who owns this property? D owns 1/3. B owns 2/3. Now, now that B owns 2/3, B and D are what with each other? They are tenants in common. B has no one left to be joint with. Okay? So if B dies now, who's the property going to? His heirs. It's going to his heirs at this point. Did you notice how things changed? Okay? When you sell, that guy can't be a joint tenant. He came on at a different time. He doesn't have the unities. All right? When C dies, it goes to his surviving partner, but not the one that's a tenant in common. Once it becomes a tenancy in common over here, then if you don't say otherwise, it's going to go to your heirs. Those are the type of things we're testing you on and nothing more, to be quite honest with you. Okay? Questions or comments on that? Yes?
When D buys in, he could always make it a joint one, right?
Okay, if he wants to have joint tenancy with B and C while they're both alive, how would they do that? They would redeed the property to themselves. Now they have the unities of possession, interest, time, and title. Then they can be joint tenants. And of course, they would ask for it to be written in the deed, right? Okay, good. Now, I want you to be I want you to be cautious on the exam. Okay? I will do things to you to make you miss questions, and you have to avoid them. You have to follow the rules. Listen closely to this. Myself and my 2 brothers, we buy property together. We're on the same title at the same time. We each put in the same amount of money. We close on that property. How do we hold title to that property? Tenancy in common. You didn't fall for the trick. Did you notice how I was setting you up? I had you buying at the same time with the same interest in the property. I was trying to trick you into saying joint tenancy. But you know the rule of joint tenancy is if you want joint tenancy, not only must you meet the rules, but you also must ask for it to be written in the deed. Okay? Good. You didn't fall for the trick. At least the ones who answered did not. The rest of you okay on that?